Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Shevuot Daf Mem Zayin. We're going to get started at the top of the daf. What we're going to do now is go back to the original Mishna at the beginning of our chapter. If one of the people who's supposed to take the oath, right, the one who's supposed to take the oath and not have to pay, happens to be someone who is disqualified as a witness. Okay, and we had all the disqualified witnesses from Sanhedrin, for example, someone who gambles, or someone who, for example, is a milaveh b'ribit, loans on interest. The Gemara asks, Hachu lamali, why do we need all these cases? We already had, right? We already know of someone who's suspicious of not being an honest person, to which the Gemara answers, Tana psula d'oraita v'katana psula d'Rabbanan. First, they wanted to give you all the people who are not trusted on a Torah level, and then they added all these extra people who are not trusted on a rabbinic level. These are all rabbinic disqualifications. Remember, right, with the discussion of the gambler, it might be someone who's a professional gambler. That's all they do. They don't have another job other than gambling. Or some people think it's actually any kind of gambler, and that has to do with asmachta. If you hold asmachta as lokanya, but I'm not going to go into that right now. So, psula hayushnehem chashudim. Next line. What if both of them are chashudim? And here the Mishnah had brought a debate. So one opinion says, I'm just going back to the original Mishnah, if both of them are chashudim. So now again, you give it to the first person, they're supposed to take the oath and not pay. But then they're not trusted. It goes to the other person. The other person is supposed to take the oath to get the money. However, they're also not trusted. So it goes back to the first one, according to Rabbi Yossi. Chazra, Shvuad, and Koma goes back to the original person. It's still unclear what it means, and we're going to get to a big debate about what this means. Rabbi Meir Omer Yachloku. Rabbi Meir says we split it 50-50. Okay, since we're not sure, and this one's not trusted, and that's not trusted, what are we doing? Right? Maman hamutal b'safek. We learned about Mitzia, right? According to some opinions, we split it 50-50. So now the first question is going to be who really said what? Because in our Mishnah, it says that Rabbi Yossi says the first opinion, Rabbi Meir says the second. But Amalei Rava Rav Nachman, Rava asked Rav Nachman, Hechitnan, how's your version of the Mishnah? What does it say? Amalei Lo Yadani. He says, honestly, I don't really know. So then he asks him, Hilchatamai, well, what do you paskin now? In general, when Rabbi Yossi disagrees with Rabbi Meir, we actually paskin like Rabbi Yossi. So since you don't know which one's Rabbi Yossi, how do you paskin? Amar Le, Rav Nachman, who was a big posek, he was a dayan, and he often had answers to basic, would rule on these cases. Amar Le lo yadana. And then he answers, I actually don't know. Itmar, now we're going to see, though, there's a debate here, okay? Or there's a different, actually, it was said, this time Itmar is not an introduction to a machloket amorim, usually it is. This just says it was said, there's a different version of what Rav Nachman said. Amar Rav Yossi Bar Menyumi, Amar Rav Nachman, Rabbi Yossi Omer Yachloku. According to Rabbi Yossi Bar Menyumi, Rav Nachman actually said that Rabbi Yossi flips with Rabbi Meir the way it appears in our version, and Rabbi Yossi is actually the one who said we split it 50-50, which is very relevant now because then it means we're going to paskin that way. And V'chein Tani Rav Zvi Bar Oshaya, Rav Zvi, the son of Oshaya, said Rabbi Yossi Omer Yachloku. We had the same version. Some people said, it was a minor difference here, that Rav Zvid, not Rav Zvi Bar Oshaya, but Tani Rav Zvid, Amar Rabbi Oshaya. Rav Zvid brought a braita in the name of, that said, in the name of Rabbi Oshaya, Rabbi Yossi Omer Yachloku. Okay, again, the same version. So we had one version that said Rav Nachman didn't really know. The second version says Rav Nachman actually knew, or maybe Rav Zvid said in the name of Rav Oshaya, and then it wasn't connected with Rav Nachman, or Rav Zvid, son of Oshaya, said that Rabbi Yossi is the one who said Yachloku. And in fact, Rav Yossi Bar Menyumi, the same Rav Yossi Bar Menyumi who quoted Rav Nachman is saying Rabbi Yossi says Yachloku, also said that Abed Rav Nachman Uvda Yachloku, that Rav Nachman actually ruled that way at a particular case and split it 50-50. But now, okay, who said what is important and actually very important for halacha l'maaseh? But now we're going to move on and understand, well, what's the other opinion that now perhaps is attributed to Rabbi Meir, not Rabbi Yossi, but what is it? Chazra, Shvuot, and Koma. What's the case? Lahechan chazra. To where does it go back? In other words, what's the meaning that it goes back to the original person? The original person gets to keep the item because or since they can't take the oath, they have to pay the item, right? They have to give it to the other one. So we're going to say now, we're going to have a debate between the rabbis in Israel and the rabbis in Babylonia. Amar Rabbi Ami, Rabotenu shebebavel amru, chazra shvuah l'Sinai. It goes back to Har Sinai. Okay, what does that mean? It means it goes back to God. What does it mean it goes back to God? What it means is we leave everything status quo. Which means that the first person who's supposed to take the oath to not have to pay actually cannot pay even without taking the oath. But it goes back to Sinai. God is the one who's going to basically punish him if he was lying, or her. Okay, so that's the first opinion. That's the rabbis in Babylonia. The rabbis in Israel say it goes back to the one who was obligated the oath. And because it goes back to the one who was obligated the oath and the person can't take the oath, they actually have to pay. Okay, that's the ones in Israel. So Amar Papa, Rabutenu Shebabavel. Now we want to know where Papa comes and says, who were these rabbis? And how do we know that they're the ones who said this? So Rabutenu Shebabavel, Rav Ushmuel. Rabutenu Sheberetz Israel, Rabbi Abba. Okay, these are early Amoraim. Rabbi Abba is second generation Israel, Rabbi Shmuel, first generation Babylonian. When we say the rabbis in Babylonia, we mean Rabbi Shmuel. Say the rabbis in Israel, we mean Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba maybe is third generation, second, third generation. So Rabbeinu, how do we know that Rabbeinu Shebavel is Rabbi Shmuel? It's not. So now for each one, we're going to bring a case. And I want to remind you, we're looking for a case, although that's not exactly going to be the case, and that's why I want to clarify. What they're trying to find is a case where someone's supposed to take an oath. Right? They can't, it goes to the other person. The other person can't, it goes back to the original person. And if we go with the rabbis in Babylonia, they say, okay, the money just stays where it is, even though theoretically the first person is supposed to take the oath. They can't, but since the other person can't either, we just leave the money where it is, status quo. So what we're going to see, though, is not exactly a case where it boomerangs back. It goes from one to the other and then back to the first. What's going to be is someone's going to be obligated to oath, and they're not going to be able to take that oath, and we're just going to leave the money where it is. We're going to say status quo. So it's not exactly the same case, but it is similar, where in the end, there's someone who has to take an oath, and since they can't take the oath, we're just going to leave it, and they're not going to have to pay. And what's kind of maybe similar is, in a case of this, the first person is supposed to take the oath, but they're not believed, right? They're not trustworthy. So instead, we give it to the second person, but since they're not trustworthy, it goes back to the first. So in a sense, it's not like the first person has done something terribly wrong. It's just they can't take the oath in the end. In other words, it's not, they did do something wrong because they're not honest. But since the other person's also not honest, everything's equal. So in a sense, that's going to be our case. We're going to find a case where somebody can't take an oath, but not really because they're not honest. It's for a different reason. And then kind of it's neutral. And because it's neutral and they can't take the oath for some outside reason, we're going to let them just get away with it, and we'll just leave the money where it is. And then we're going to find the opposite for the rabbis in Babylonia, which is Rabbi Abba, where even though someone can't take the oath, we're actually going to make them pay. Or because they can't take the oath, we're actually going to make them pay. Okay, so let's look at our cases. Ditnan, v'chein hayitomim lo yiparu ela b'shvuah. So yitomim, you can't get payback. If you're an orphan, you want to get payback from, well, okay, there's two things here. There's number one, if you're an orphan, okay, and you owe money, and someone comes to collect, and it's your father owed the money, and you want to be collected from, so you can't collect money from orphans unless you take an oath. That's not what this Mishnah is talking about that we're going to quote, but that's a general Mishnah, okay, which is you can't collect money from orphans unless you take an oath, because right, if they owed money, because what's the issue? The issue is maybe you're taking advantage. Maybe the father paid it back and the orphans have no idea. They have no way of knowing. But now this Mishnah, which we're going to see on Daf Memchet, on the next daf, this Mishnah says, okay, this actually, they're going to ask about this Mishnah, right? This is in our Mishnah that we read already. They're going to delve into this Mishnah in the next stuff. But anyway, let's just go back. So now they say about our now, this Mishnah is talking about, from our chapter, Yitomim who inherit. Now, we're not talking about, we're not trying to get it from Yitomim. We're orphans whose father had a loan out with someone, meaning the father lent money to someone, and the orphans now want to collect that loan. They have to take an oath. Now, the Gemara asks, okay, this is what's going to come up on Daf Memchet, which is Vehevina ba miman. Who are they collecting from? Okay, now what it means is they have to take an oath to collect this loan of the father's, even though they have a shtar in their hand. The father gave them the shtar, right, or they inherited it. It was an IOU. Someone obviously owes money, so why do they have to take an oath? So that's going to be the question. If we're talking about the malve, the yatomim of the malve, right, that lo yipra b'shvuah, avuan shaka below shvuah, be'ina b'shvuah, it doesn't make any sense. if the father could have collected this loan from anybody without an oath, why on earth do the kids have to take an oath? It doesn't make any sense. We always say that somebody who's holding a star in their hand, we assume the star wasn't paid, so they should be able to do it. So therefore, Elahachi Kamar, v'chein hayitomim min hayitomim. And that's why I prefaced it by talking about the other orphans. It means orphans from orphans. Okay? Lo yiparu ela b'shvuah. Now, what I said before is everyone has to take an oath to get money from orphans. And now we're saying if orphans inherit an oath from their father, right, from their father, who was owed money by someone who also died, and their children, so those orphans have to take an oath to the other ones, right? The malveh, the lenders, have to take an oath in order to receive the money back. Well, Rav Shmuel de Amrei Travayu, Rav Shmuel now explained this halacha. What case are we talking about? Now, there's two different options. Who died first? The father of the lender or the father of the borrower? So lo shanu ella, this case is said that they have to take an oath in the case shemet malve b'chaye lo, where first the creditor died, the lender died, and the borrower was still alive. Now, if that's the case, you'll see why in a minute. And then they have to take the oath from the other orphan, right? Then the orphans of the malve. Okay, so if the malve died and passed on this loan to their children, and the children could have collected it from the father, right? Now, when the father dies, the borrower, when the borrower dies, they can only collect from the orphans with an oath. But, okay, you'll see why in a minute it can't be the other case. It's not so unique that it's that case, because obviously they're getting from orphans that have taken oath. But what if the love died first and the malva was still alive? So the borrower dies. His orphans inherit the obligation to pay back. Now the rule is that the malva, who's still alive, can only collect the loan if he takes an oath to the children, right, to the orphans that he never got paid back. Now here comes the problem. If then the malva dies without taking that oath that he was obligated to take, right? Then he dies. Now he was already obligated an oath to them. Now he can't pass that oath on to his children. Now, why can't he pass that oath on to his children? It's very simple. His oath is what? What's the problem with children? The problem with children is they don't really know what happened with their father's property. Now, if let's say the first case, if the orphans have to take an oath from the orphans in the case where their father died first, and then they incur the obligation to take the oath once the borrower's father dies. So they can go take an oath. And what oath can they say? Well, they can't take an oath saying, we know our father wasn't paid back. They don't know for sure. But what they can say is, we found this, right? We're taking an oath that we found this among our father's possessions, and he didn't tell us before his death anything about it, like this was already paid back, okay? Meaning there's no information that we know that would change the fact that you owe us the money. But they can't say, we know for sure that we're owed the money. So in the second case, where their father died second, so their father was already obligated to the orphans to take an oath. Now, what oath was the father obligated to take? I did not get paid this money back. Your father didn't pay me the money back. But his children can't take that oath because they don't know for sure that the father never paid back. The only thing they could say is with their father, right, that our father didn't tell us anything otherwise. But that's not the same oath their father was. So what it means is the father can't pass on an oath to his children because the oath his children could take is not the same as the oath he could take. So therefore, the only way they could get back a loan is to take the same oath the father does, and they have no way to do that. So they can't take an oath. Here's our key now. They are in a situation where they can't take an oath because, right, theoretically they should, right? The only way to get the money is to take an oath, and they can't take that oath. So come Rav and Shmuel and say, when the Mishna said, right, they have to take a Shevuot, it's not talking about this case because here they can't take the oath. And therefore, what's going to happen, okay, since they can't take that oath, everything just stays status quo. And there you see, that's our halacha. Someone can't take an oath, again, not because they did anything wrong. It's just because he can't pass that oath on to his children, which means there's no way they could collect with an oath. And in that case, right, they can't collect. And then we say status quo. And if really those orphans of the borrowers should have paid back the money, well, God will take care of it somehow, right? God will deal with it. Okay, that's what it means. It goes back to Sinai. And there you see Rav and Shmuel hold what we saw before. Before we move on, I want to just clarify one thing. We started with this Mishnah, which really means orphans, right? The way we explained it now, orphans can collect from other orphans if they take an oath, right? And when are they allowed to collect taking an oath? They're allowed to collect if their father died first, then the other father died, then they can take the oath to the orphans, and then they can collect with an oath. But they can't collect with an oath, and they can't collect at all, in fact, if their father died first and passed on the oath to them. And that's where everything stays status quo, and that proves Rav and Shmuel. Now we're going to move on to Rabbanit Michelle Farber. Rabbanit Michelle Farber, we said, is Rabbi Abba. And what did we claim Rabbi Abba is saying? That in a case where you can't take an oath, right? Like we just had a case where you can't take an oath, instead of saying everything stays status quo, actually you have to pay. Okay, so now we're going to see what that case is. Right, right? What did we say? Goes back to the one who's obligated, and they can't take the oath, so they actually have to pay. So now we're going to see Rabbi Abba. We get back to the naska de Rabbi Abba that we've seen a bunch of times already. So there was a person who stole a bar of silver from another person. Ata the kamei de Rabbi Ami. They came before Rabbi Ami. Yativ Rabbi Abba, that's who we're looking for, kamei, right? And he was sitting in front of Rabbi Ami, who was ruling on this case. So one witness comes along and says, the person stole the silver bar. I saw him. No, the person says, you're right, I did take it. However, I took it from the other person, but it's because it was mine. Now, Rabbi Ami, how are the judges supposed to rule this case? So let's say, go pay, right? But we don't have two witnesses. So how could I make him pay the silver bar if we don't have two witnesses? Niftere, let's exempt him, but there is one witness. So if there's one witness, usually that obligates an oath. What oath should he be taking? Well, the witness said, you stole it. So he should be saying, no, I disagree with you. I didn't steal it. But he can't say that because he did. Well, again, you took it. So he can't say, I didn't take it. He did take it. So, right? So let's say the person should go take the oath because there's one witness. But because the person agrees with what the one witness said, now we learned this last time. We said it doesn't really mean he's like a thief, but he's someone who can't really take the oath. Just like a thief can't take an oath, he can't take the oath because he can't say, I didn't take it. He did take it. And the oath he's obligated to take is one he can't take. Just like the orphans, same case as before. The orphans are supposed to take an oath that the father took, which is, I didn't get the money back for sure. But the orphans can't take that oath because they can't say that. So Amarle Rabbi Abba. So, Rabbi Ami doesn't know what to do. He's stuck in the middle. Rabbi Abba says to him, here comes the big line. He is obligated to an oath because there's one witness against him. However, but he can't take the oath. Anyone who's obligated to and can't take a shvuah actually has to pay. So the person who took this silver bar actually is going to have to pay. So that's Rabbi Abba. Now, so we proved that Rav and Shmuel are the Rabbeinu in Bavel who said what we said. Rabbeinu in Bavel said. We have Rabbeinu, Rabbi Abba, it's Rabbeinu Shevuot Israel. Again, remember, both cases are not cases where it was from one, switched to the other, and went back to the original, but it was a case where the original person can't take the oath. And not really because they're not trustworthy, just because the oath is not able to be taken. In one case, we say status quo. The other opinion is, no, they actually have to pay. Since they can't take the oath to exempt themselves, they actually have to just pay. So now Amar Rabba, Kavateh de Rabbi Abba Mistabra. He says, it seems like Rabbi Abba has it right. The Tani Rabbi Ami, because Rabbi Ami brought this brayta that says, Shvuat Hashem tia ben shnehen. Now here we're talking about Shvuat HaShomer. We have a case where the Shomer misuses, or we think the Shomer misused the property, the item that the Shomer was watching, right? Somebody was watching an item, seems they were misusing it. They have to take an oath that they didn't do anything wrong. Now, there's disagreement between the Shomer and the person who gave it to the person. So what do we say? They have to take a shvuah, but it says, bein shnehem. The shvuah should be between the two of them. Now, it sounds like between just the two of them and not anyone else. Well, who else is there? So what are they darshan? Velo bein hayorshim. So the brayta Rabbi Ami brings says, and not the orphans. Okay, meaning if they both died and it's orphan to orphan, about the original, the orphans don't take the oath. Now, hechidami, what's the case? If it's the case, okay, one guy says to the other, listen, my father gave your father something to watch and it's still in your property and give it back to me. And the other one said, right, there's 100 shekels that he gave. Listen, you're right about 50, but I don't have the other 50. The other 50 my father already gave back or something like that. Malihu, Maliyavua. Okay, that's a classic moda b'miktzat. He admits to half the claim, doesn't admit to the other half. He should have to take the oath. Ella, so why does it say, right, they don't take an oath? So Ella lav de amarle manal abba biyadavicha, v'amarle chamshin yadana chamshin lo yadana. It must be a case where he said, listen, one said, my father gave your father 100 and he didn't get anything back. And the other one says, what do you mean? He already 50, I know I have of your father's, but the other 50, I don't know anything about. Now, what's the problem? If you say the father, like that would have been chayev because it's moda b'miktzat. Now, what's the problem here? If the father would have been obligated, then the yoresh should be obligated. In this case, the father is obligated because it's moda b'miktzat. But what's the problem? If the father didn't know either, now if the father didn't know about the other 50, he can't take the oath. You can only take an oath if you know something for sure. You can't take an oath. What's an oath? An oath means I'm certain that this is the case. And he's not certain. So he's obligated an oath, but he can't pay the money. And that's why the Yorshim also can't take the oath. In other words, and again, what does it mean then? The Yorshim can't take the oath, but they would have to pay. And therefore, Yorshim. In other words, what this is saying is the Yorshim don't have to. Right? Now, this is the thing. The father, we're going to assume, why does the father have to pay? Because if the father doesn't know, it's the father's fault the father doesn't know. In other words, when the father says, I don't know about the other 50, well, he should have known about it. He should be careful about his step, and we're going to actually obligate him. But if the orphan knows, we need a case where the father's going to be obligated, and in this case, we're going to say obligated means obligated an oath and can't take the oath and therefore has to pay, which is exactly what we were looking for. The orphans, though, since they're not expected to know, because how are they supposed to know all the business dealings of their father? Therefore, they actually don't have to pay. Okay, and that's what we're looking for. Shevuot Hashem tiyeh ben shnehem. There's a Shevuot, and in this case, an obligation for Shevuot that they can't keep, so they'll have to pay for the father, but not the heirs, because the heirs anyway can't take the oath. And then, right, but it can't be the other case, and that's just to reject that and support the first explanation, which already supported Rabbi Abba. But if you're going to say the father in a similar case is exempt, then I don't need to exempt the children, right? If the father anyway was exempt, then the children, of course, would be exempt. So we need a case where the father's obligated and the orphans are exempt, and that's what we found, and that supports Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Shmuel. Now we're going back to Rabbi Shmuel. Now we have a question about Rabbi Shmuel. If that's how we explain Shevuot Hashem tiyeh ben shnehem, and it supports Rabbi Abba, so how are Rabbi Shmuel going to dart on that pasuk? Rabbi Shmuel, Hai Shevuot Hashem, my kadarshebe. So what are they going to learn from that pasuk? To which they answer, they need it for something else that Shimon ben Tarfon said. What did Shimon ben Tarfon omer? Shevuot Hashem tiyeh ben shnehem, milamed sheshvuah chala al shnehem. Shevuot Hashem tiyeh ben shnehem means the Shevuah applies to both of them. Okay, what on earth does that mean? So this is going to mean something else. Okay, what does this mean? This means that if you have someone who, okay, what they're saying here is the punishment for the oath falls on both of them. If there's a Shevuot HaShomrim and the Shomer lied and said, oh yeah, I watched your item perfectly and he didn't, right? And he stole it, right? I swear it was stolen and he lied. Well, the responsibility for that false oath is actually on the other side as well. This is fascinating. Why? If I gave my item to someone to watch and they weren't trustworthy, they lied about it, well, what am I doing making dealings with people and asking people who are not trustworthy to watch my stuff? And in the end, my actions by me giving you, let's say it's you who lied falsely, I gave you something to watch and you were not trusted in the end, you lied falsely, I actually caused that lie to happen. And I caused it really by associating with bad people. I kind of almost like I put a stumbling block in front of you because I took a non-trustworthy person. I gave them something I should trust them in. And then they lied to me about it. It's kind of my fault. Now, it's really not, but it's somewhat your fault. And we're going to see some other statements of Shimon ben Tarfon. They're seemingly unconnected, but there's actually something that connects all the cases. Shimon ben Tarfon Omer, we're going to have 4 statements of his. How do we know that you're warned not to solicit prostitution. Okay, meaning go create a situation where a different, not you, but a different man and woman engage in ni'uf, right? Ni'uf is adultery. Okay, so where you kind of bring a woman to a man and kind of arrange it, solicit a sexual act between a man and a woman, the woman being married to someone who's not her husband. How do we know you can't do that? This is, again, by the way, associating with bad people, right? Now, here it's worse because here you're intentionally doing something wrong. In other words, it's not really forbidden by the Torah, but now we're going to say it is forbidden by the Torah because even though you're not engaging in the action, you're doing an action to cause someone else to engage in an action. So it's, again, causing someone to do something. In the first case, it wasn't exactly intentional, but what they're saying is, it was somewhere in murky waters there. This is clearly much more intentional bad thing to do. Talmud Lomar, lo tin'af, lo tan'if. Read it as not just lo tin'af, as you do it, commit adultery yourself, but lo tan'if, don't cause adultery to happen. V'teragnu ba'ohalechem. This is after the spies. This is a description in Sefer Dvarim when Moshe recounts the story of the spies. He says, you teragnu ba'ohalechem. Okay, you did, I'm trying to remember the word for teragnu, but you did something bad in your tents. Okay, so let's see how they define this. What did the people do wrong in their tents? They say as okay, so now they're going to take this word teragnu and they're going to do what's called notrikon. They're going to say it's an abbreviation for tartem viginitem ba'alo shamakom. You went, like latour is to tour, okay, like the meraglim, they also lo taturu, okay, tartem viginitem, okay, you spied on the land, and yuginitem, you condemned ohalosha makom, the place of God, because what did you say in the end? Right, that pasuk. I'll read you the whole pasuk. It says vateragnu ba'alechem vatomru. You made this condemnation of God by saying the following: "V'sinat Hashem otanu tzianu me'eretz Mitzrayim latet otanu b'yad ha'amori lashmideni." Right, the people then said, "Oh my goodness, God, you must hate us, and that's why you took us out of Egypt, so you could destroy us by the Amori people." Now, what he's saying is, what does it mean in your tents? What it means is you condemn the tent of God, meaning you condemn that God placed His presence among the Jewish people, and you said, we don't want this. You did a terrible thing to us by doing this. So that's what they did wrong. Now, what's interesting here is it's not exactly the same. And this, in fact, stands different from all the other three. We haven't gotten to the other fourth one yet, but this is from the other two, and from the third one, the fourth one, we're going to see in a minute. However, there's still a connection because what, in fact, did the people do? They were like the spies. Here it says, you yourselves, it's as if you were like the spies, as if you went into the land and spied, and then decided to say, we don't want God, because the nation ended up kind of, again, joining this group of people that maybe they shouldn't have joined. Okay, next. Ad hanahar gadol nahar prat. Okay, this is in the very beginning of Sefer Dvarim. These are both, by the way, in chapter 1. But even before that, it talks about where the people are supposed to go, right? Panu, go derech har Mori, to the Arava, the Shvela, the Negev, Chofayam. Okay, until then, nahar gadol nahar prat. Now, nahar prat was not so great. So why does it say nahar gadol nahar prat? The Euphrates. Shimon ben Tarfon omel karev legabe dehena v'idhan. Okay, what does that mean? You should go near someone who is nimshach with the oil, who is anointed with the oil, and you will also be like him. Okay, meaning the Nahar Gadol, Nahar Prat. Okay, even though it was the smallest of all the four of the rivers, but it's called the Gadol because of its importance. Why is it so important? Because it was near the border of Israel, and that's why it became known as the Big River, because it was influenced by its neighbor and got its name from its neighbor. Again, this connection between connect with good is actually more in the positive as opposed to the others, which were don't do this. This is the positive, associate with good people, and you will also be considered great. Moving on to the next topic. Hachemvani al pinkaso. So this is that interesting case where we have a person who hires workers, can't afford to pay them right now, asks for the chemvani, the storekeeper who usually has extra money, to pay upfront for him, and then he'll pay the chemvani back. Now what happens? The chemvani comes and says, pay me the money. And the guy goes to his workers, and the workers say, we didn't even get paid yet. Chemvani demands the money, and the workers went to the chemvani and says, we want money from you. So we have this problem. Everybody wants to get paid, right? Everyone claims I didn't pay, right? I paid, the Chamani says, and the workers said we didn't get paid, and the Baal Bayit stuck in the middle and doesn't know who to believe. So what we said in the Mishnah is, right, they both, according to Tanakama, they both take an oath to the Baal Bayit because that was who they made the arrangement with in the first place. The Chamani and the workers didn't make an arrangement, but right now that's where the problem is. So each one takes an oath to the original person who they made the arrangement with. The Baal Bayit made an arrangement with the workers, I'll pay you, and the Baal Bayit made the arrangement with the Chamani will pay instead of him in the meantime, and he'll pay him later. So now he's got an issue with both of them. He has to take an oath to both of them. Ben Nana says, what do you mean? For sure, one of those oaths is a lie. One of the groups is lying. How can we create a situation where we take a false oath? So from here, we're going to get off on another issue, which is, so first, Tanya Amar Rebbe, Tarach Shvuah Zolama. So according to this Braita, Rebbe says, how could you make them take this oath? He basically sounds like he's agreeing with Bananas and saying, how could you make them both take this oath? Right? It's you're causing somebody to lie falsely. So Amar le Rabbi Chanina Tanina Shneim Nishbaim v'not limi balabayit. So he says, Rabbi Chanina says, what do you mean? You put it in the Mishnah, the mainstream opinion, that they both take an oath. So how could you be so surprised by this? Like, why are they allowing this? You yourself put it in the Mishnah. So the question is, did Rebbe accept this critique of Rabbi Chia and decide, yeah, you're right, like I'm going to go back to my original, and of course they can each get paid or not, okay? Or did he stick with his problem, like agreeing with Ben Nana? So Tashma, let's see from here. Tanya, it says in a Braita, Rebbe Omer Poalim Nishbaim Lechem Bani, Ita LeBalabayim Bebaile. Must be Rebbe changed his position because look, it says the Poalim take an oath to the Chemani directly. Okay, the way you might have thought. Right now, the argument is between the two of them. Now, we said it doesn't make any sense, but maybe really it does make sense because maybe they should go straight to the Chamani and say, listen, we didn't get paid, and get their money just like we saw in the Mishnah. In the beginning of the Mishnah, the Socher gets to take an oath that they didn't get paid. So if Rebbe really changed his mind, right, if he didn't change his mind, he should have said they go to the Baal Bayit. So it must be he really changed his mind. So Rava says, no, it's not a good proof. You misunderstood that Braita. What that Braita means is the Poalim still take the oath to the Baal Bayit, of course, as we explained before. But they do it in front of the Chemvani, because if the Chemvani is not there, the workers don't care to lie. Like there's no one there who knows the truth. And okay, so they'll lie falsely. I mean, people don't like to lie falsely, but maybe. But they make sure the Chemvani is there. And that's why Rebbe said the Poalim Nishbein LeChemvani means in front of the Chemvani. They take the oath though, but the oath is to the Baal Bayit. And therefore, it doesn't show that Rebbe really changed his mind. So we don't really know. Okay, and what's the reason? They say, so they're embarrassed in front of them. It's very hard to take an oath in front of the person you're lying to their face, right? If they're right there. They know, the Chemani knows the truth, whether he paid or didn't pay. So if they take the oath and lie in his face, it's unlikely they'll do that. And that's why we make sure the Chemani is there. Okay, now we're going to show a debate, which somewhat is going to relate one element to our mission. Itmar, or in some way. Now we have a case where two witnesses come and have contradictory testimony, not edim zomim, but contradictory testimony. We don't know who to believe. One said so-and-so killed, and one said so-and-so didn't kill. And we know one of them is lying, but we don't know which one. So now all of them are 50% not trustworthy. So what do we do with that? 50% not trustworthy. Well, now what if? So what we're going to do is we're going to allow them each to testify in their own separate cases. And that's what Amar Rav Huna, Zoba b'fnei atzma umida, v'zoba b'fnei atzma umida. According to Rav Huna, they can each be trusted in their own, right? If they both testify together, right, then we know one of them is lying, right? If one goes against another, then we're going to have to dismiss this again. But, or if, they're somehow, we're going to see, like, what would be a case of that, where they're somehow together. But if they each come separately, since we're not sure, we leave them what's called the chizkat kashrut. The earliest thing we knew about them is they were kosher witnesses. So we leave them as kosher witnesses until proven otherwise, right? Innocent until proven guilty. Rav Chisda Amar, why am I going to get myself into a situation where potentially there's false witnesses? We're not going to allow these witnesses ever, in any case, because they're maybe liars. So now we're going to go through some cases and talk about what they're debating. Shnei malvin, ushnei lovin, ushnei shtarot. Hainu plugtayu. They're going to have a disagreement in a case where there's really no overlap at all. There's two creditors, two borrowers. Each creditor lent to a different borrower, and each one had a different star. And on one star, you have these two signed, and the other star, you have those two signed. They have nothing to do with each other. For sure, that's the machloket. Rav Huna will say, okay, chezkat kashrut, we can accept both those shtarot, and each malva can collect from each loaf. And Rav Chisda will say no, because why get involved? None of those shtarot are good documents. But shnei shtarot, malva velove ushnei shtarot. What if there's a malva and a love? Okay, the malva lent the love money twice, and there's two documents, and on one document two are signed, and on the other document the other two are signed. Now we know for sure that one of those documents is no good, and since we have the same malva and the same lova, and it's two loans, and we know one between the two of them is good and one is not good, ya balashtar la tachtona. Everybody will agree in that case that the balashtar the malva can only collect one, because we know for sure one is false. How about, and this we're going to end with the teku, and that's how we're going to end our daf today, shnei malvin velova echadu shnei shtarot. What if there's one borrower but two creditors? So now we have two different creditors. Each one wants to get money from the love. Actually, this isn't the teku yet. Sorry, we have four cases. My mistake. We have two lenders, one borrower, and two different documents. Now, that hainu matnitin, that's our Mishna, right? Because what's our Mishna? Let's go with the mainstream opinion. Okay, again, two lenders. Each lender wants to collect from one borrower, right? Now, in this case, it's just like, now, according to Rav Huna, what's he going to say? Rav Huna is going to say, we're going to hold them b'kashrut here, because each one of them goes to collect the money from the love, and he could say, my document's good. And the love, right? The love is one person owes two loans, right? But one loan is no good. But each creditor is allowed to collect their loan on the basis that they claim, well, I don't know that this one's no good. I don't know that that one's not good. Okay? And therefore, we're not going to make the each malve lose out, right? That's like the chemvani and the poalim. Neither one should lose out. Each one takes an oath, even though we know for sure that one is no good. Okay? And therefore, they can each collect. But this last case, shnei loven umalve echad ushnei shtarot. But if there's one creditor, two borrowers, and right, the creditor wants to collect from each person, and there's two documents, here we get into a problem, because the malva is trying to get the loan back, but it's one person who's clearly not owed more than one loan. So now we're not going to let that person, right? Or we don't know. Can we let that person get from both of the people or not? And that's the real question, right? Can he collect from these two things? Because for sure one of them is not. And each love theoretically could say, it's not mine, right? Mine is no good. I don't owe you money. The other one say, mine is no good. I don't owe you money. And the question is, right, would Rav Huna in that case say each one is trusted? And that's what we're going to end with. We don't know the answer. Okay, so quick review of our daf. We started with why do we have the Misachik Kubiyah? What does that add? And we said Psulim de Rabbanan it adds. Then we had the Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir who said what? That Yachloku right, we said, sorry, I forgot for a second, Yachloku or, Chazra Shvualim Kuma. And then we had to say, what is Chaz, right? Then we said, do we switch the girsa? Perhaps it looked like Rav Nachman did and actually held Yachloku. But then we went into what's this opinion of Chazra Shvualim Kuma. We saw the opinion of the Israeli rabbis and the Babylonian rabbis, and we proved, how do we know which one says it? We actually then tried to prove Rabbi Abba. And we said, well, what did Rav and Shmuel do with that source? And then we explain what they do, which is they have it for the drush of Shimon ben Tarfon. We brought four drushot of Shimon ben Tarfon, and then we got back to the Chemvani al Pinchasil case. We had a question: did Rebbe change his mind about it? It wasn't clear. And then we went to these four cases. Right, we got into a machlok at Rav Huna and Rav Chisda in a similar type thing. It was a little different, but then it related back and we connected it with our Mishna. And we brought these four different options of when we know for sure, right? Some of them we know for sure one of them is no good, but we don't know which one. So how do we deal with it? And that really depends on the situation. That we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day.